Studies show that more than 50% of parents with children aged 6 to 18 have reported them to be bullied. Cyberbullying is one-fifth of that. So that in mind, how do we prepare our children to embrace the age of social media? Hi, this is Takatoshi Shibayama, host of the Future Design Podcast. I run a blockchain solutions company, but I'm always searching for new technologies and ideas to improve our lives. Today I have Anuradha Rao, Ph.D. of Communications and New Media, and also the founder of Cyber Cognizanz that works with people to understand the promises and perils of working and living in cyberspace and how to combat its negativities. She talks to us about how parents can avoid children from being bullied, what to do when they're bullied, and how to educate our children to be better prepared from the potential adversities from being online. So stick around to the end.
It's interesting that we always talk about social media in a different way. So sometimes we talk about social media in a good way where we can share the things that we do in our lives, the happy moments in our lives. But sometimes there's a lot of other people who actually envy you or feel disgust towards what you're posting out. And it causes a lot of social problems like cyberbullying, for instance. I had recently read an article about last week when we actually discussed about you having onto the show a Japanese pro wrestler / reality show TV star that got really cyberbullied and committed suicide. And I thought it was a very timely issue to talk about it because more and more while we're in this quarantine lockdown, we're spending more time online. We're using social media more frequently than before. So are there any ways that we can actually prevent ourselves from being hurt or being harassed online?
Right. That's absolutely right, Taka. I mean, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and yet cyberbullying continues unabated. And we've seen this across all societies where we have this sort of general lack of concern about the kind of words or the kind of messages we're posting out there. And I think the kind of messages that we're receiving seem to be a combination of things. You're right, it's social media being used to help, to empathize with other people in difficult situations. But at the extreme end, you also have a lot of hate speech, and you have a lot of flaming, you have cyberbullying. And what cyberbullying is basically, and we have to distinguish this from other types of online harassment, because there's cyber stalking, there is, like I said, there's flaming, there's trolling. And cyberbullying is basically when an individual is at the receiving end of very personal name calling, very intense kind of individualized hate that's spewed towards them. And what happens then is it sort of erodes a person's sense of self-confidence, their sense of self-esteem. I think a lot of people, when they post hateful messages online, they don't really understand the impact it causes on others. So I would say the one thing that we can start doing is to be more mindful about the kind of things we post and share when we're on social media. So sometimes flippant remarks about someone's weight, someone's sexual orientation, it might seem like quote unquote funny, but it does cause intense harm. And one of the reasons why people aren't aware of the harm it causes is because you have a lack of social cues on social media. I mean, funnily enough, you can't understand, you can't look into a person's eyes and see the kind of pain that they're feeling, right? The kind of social cues that children are grown up socializing in real life interactions is missing nowadays. They grow up on the internet, and when that happens, they empathize less. And studies have shown that there is less empathy when people are spending more and more time online. So what can be done then is for parents. So the cyber literacy work that I do is also trying to get parents to be part of this effort to make cyberspace, the internet, a kinder space, because we sort of lost kindness along the way. And it also stems from the fact that parents are busy. I mean, I have 2 kids and life is really busy, but we still have to spend time to try and at least tell them what it means to be a good communicator. Schools can't be doing this for us. I mean, they do it for us, but as parents as well, we have that extra responsibility to teach our children what it means to be accepting of others' differences online. I think when children who have sort of a lower moral compass than adults are told this, I think then they understand. But in the absence of those kind of conversations, if people are too busy or they think, okay, the school is handling it, oh, I have laws in place, we're missing a crucial element in sort of this chain of compassion. So I think one of the things we can do is have these conversations about why it's wrong to speak a certain way online or to publish a type of post online. And I think individual efforts are really important here. If each one of us sort of say, okay, I'm not going to fat shame, or I'm not going to post a racist comment about, say, Chinese people during the coronavirus, that has a good sort of carry on effect. And I think that would help, at least in a small way, to make people understand that they can make a difference and words hurt. So I think that's one of the things we could do.
Especially for children's YouTube videos, the comment sections are actually restricted. You can't really write anything in there. So I have my child using YouTube Kids instead of the actual regular YouTube because you won't see any of these hateful comments on the comment section. Now, kids are fine because they're growing, they're understanding moral, ethical codes of life. But we as adults are already past that stage. And encouraging people to not write hateful comments online is a little bit difficult now that we already have grown past that age of understanding, what's right and what's wrong. We already know it's wrong, and it's completely deliberate that we're going to these people under the mask of ambiguity, animosity, and anonymity. So what can we do for us as people who are starting to get more online and communicating with people who don't necessarily are part of our lives? How can we prevent ourselves from this from happening?
I think first thing one needs to remember when they're target of cyberbullies is never to respond, because bullies do this to get attention, and they're doing it to sort of feel that they are superior, or they have some sort of underlying issues for which they resort to bullying in the first place. So if you give them more attention, it sort of actually only increases the problem. So what experts suggest is, if you are friends with them, unfriend them, unfollow them, de-link yourself from whatever kind of negativity that you're getting. So I think that would be the one of the first steps, because social media is a space that can follow. I mean, people can follow you on multiple sites, and so it doesn't really matter if they tell you to shut down or log out of one space. It will still follow you on other spaces. So one thing is never to respond. The other aspect is to report it, flag it to whatever website administrator or whatever platform you're using. Social media companies actually have been doing a lot of good work in recent years to try and curb cyberbullying. That being said, I mean, they are slightly late in doing this, and there have been criticisms over the past few years that they didn't respond fast enough, and even after they responded, that many of their measures are kind of inadequate or aimed at being a temporary fix rather than getting to the root of the problem. But that being said, it's good that we have social media companies have in place features like flagging, reporting abuse, there are help and safety center features. So victims can reach out and get the kind of support that was missing from these platforms earlier. One of the problems is that a lot of victims don't know that these mechanisms exist. So something needs to be done in terms of greater awareness about these kind of potentially helpful solutions. And our children are getting online at younger ages, and I would think that means that parents, educators need to sit with them before you give them an account to say that, these are potential repercussions, and if this happens, do this A, B, C, D. I don't think we have that in a lot of places at the moment. Cyberbullying is increasing at a pace that people haven't really expected. And this is the case with technology in every aspect of life. So policy making, measures are always sort of later. They come in later. So what we need to do is, like you said, what can we do apart from flagging or reporting stuff, is then write everything down in a diary, or it's a huge emotional outpouring that happens when you're being bullied. And if victims feel that they don't have a place to write down their feelings and emotions, then they tend to take it inwards. And what happens is there's increasing links between cyberbullying and self-isolation or depression, and even self-harm and suicide. And so you have this very unfortunate phenomenon of bullycide that's been happening over the past few years, but it's increasing. In at least we know more about it and we can take steps to prevent it. And bullycide, as the name suggests, basically is when someone commits suicide because they have been bullied so much that they can't take it anymore. And none of the preventive mechanisms have worked, or the preventive mechanisms kicked in late, or there weren't adequate safeguards. Say the child or adult didn't want to inform someone who could have helped them earlier, right? So there need to be sort of safeguards in place so that victims don't feel that they're isolated and that they don't have anywhere to sort of turn to and that they have to take their own life. I mean, this should be something that we can eradicate, that we should tackle with really strict measures legally as well. And there are laws all over the world that tackle cyberbullying, but that's sort of something that comes at a later time. What about what the victim is feeling before? So we need to have sort of a community level effort. You need schools, teachers, parents, community associations, the government, everyone needs to play a part. And I think the first step is to understand that this is not just something that is fleeting or something that kids will get over. It's real, it's vicious, and just in the example you gave as well. And if I think back to, say, our Asian cultures, where traditionally we would be we're sort of thought of as being more polite cultures, even in our conservative cultures, cyberbullying is taking on sort of epidemic proportions. And if you think to, say, the Korean pop stars who committed suicide, it just goes to show that there's such a toxic culture of harassment and bullying that is not called out early enough. So I think that's another important thing, is to call out bullies. And we each have to play a role in doing that. And studies have shown that bystanders play a really important role. And so if you witness bullying, and this is something that kids are told as can sort of adopt this role of being bystanders, they have to have more empathy. More empathy comes from more social interaction. So it's kind of like this catch-22 situation, and we have to sort of inculcate empathy and kindness back into our daily lives and back into our curriculum in order to be able to deal with the online world in a better way.
Yeah. You said the Asian cultures are generally more polite and courteous towards other people, but in the Asian cultures, especially that I know in Japan and South Korea, it has the harshest amount of cyberbullying that I've heard across Asia. And there's a lot more people who are dying and committing suicide because of that. And it seems like there's a huge, contraction between, social facade and then what goes on deep inside. And the more social facade that the culture asks of you to build out for being polite to other people, the stronger the inside seems like to erupt, when they can. And especially in these online situations where you're so anonymous that it's easy to burst out that frustration. And then I think you touched on like these educational problems, which I think is very necessary. Definitely have to teach our child how to act on social media. But also I kind of think that the education or the way we raise our kids nowadays has really changed since our time, right? And we're encouraging our children to be more happy, to be you give them lots of compliments, and you don't really set them up for failure too much. And I heard this term bulldozer parents, where they bulldoze all the barriers for the kids so that they can walk safely. And I think that's creating part of this for social phenomenon as well, is that they're not used to being bullied. They're not used to being told bad things about them. So what can you say about the education system of that as well?
I think it's an interesting aspect of just the very idea of comparing an East versus West, because cyberbullying is so prominent in every culture, in every society today, that I just wonder whether those social contexts does, how much of a difference does it make anymore? Because it's become rampant. If you look at even in India, it's something that I think India has one dubious distinction of being one of the countries with highest cyberbullying in the world. But of course, this depends on reported numbers. There's just so many cases that are not reported, or parents don't know that their kids are being bullied. Often kids don't say that they're being bullied because they fear that a parent's first response is to take away advice. And that's, in a way, as a parent, it sort of makes sense because you want to protect your child. But taking that device away, unfortunately, isn't the answer. Technology is just so interconnected in their lives that they can't think of, and it's practically impossible for them to function without it as well. So in which case, since we don't take the technology away, there's no option to except to make them sort of deal with these issues better. But in terms of, say, even in Singapore, cyberbullying in schools is a huge problem. And I mean, again, contextually, it's interesting because you have India as a developing country. The issues are different, with a lot of bread and butter issues, and of course, but you have a rising middle class, and you have lots of people getting online. And the same case in Singapore, you have more and more people coming online. But what you don't have is a lot of critical digital literacy, which means people come online, and in a lot of cases, parents have no idea what to do when it comes to the kind of freedoms versus responsibilities of having a device. And so when it comes to cyber parenting, and that's something that I work on, it's to try and teach parents and that we have to have sort of better ways of giving technologies to our children, right? Get them to sign a contract. When you give them a device, it shouldn't be that it's a luxury. I mean, it's not like it is a luxury. It is a privilege in a way that you're getting this so taken for granted that you can do anything you want at any point of time in the day or night. So I think parents, I think the discipline element is really important to begin with, because just like any other aspect of raising a child, once you set in place rules and you have that communicative element with your child, they begin to understand why you're doing it. And they begin to sort of, at some point of time, some self-discipline will kick in, like with every other aspect of parenting. And what that means is a parent on our part have to be a little more on the ball. It requires a lot of time, energy, and effort. But it has to be done, because without that, we're raising children that think that they can do pretty much anything online, that anything goes. I can be up day or night on watching content that is inappropriate or not for my age, and I see this a lot, and it is very worrying. I think it's great that kids have another avenue for creativity. I just think what we need to be doing along with that is to ensure that when parents open this social media account for them, that parents know the password and that parents know what their kids are doing online. And I think those necessary safety elements have to be in place before parents sort of give free rein to their kids. I think that's just a sort of missing piece of the puzzle that we need to address a bit more in a bit more detail when we want kids to be on social media. So we can't say don't be online, because that can't happen. But how can they be online in a safer, better way, right? Those are the questions that we have to be talking about.
Yeah, so a lot of people like to fast track onto becoming a big influencer, whether they're on Twitter, YouTube. Everybody dreams to be an online star these days, and they rush and they go out and buy followers. So what are the repercussions of trying to fast track you in that kind of way?
Right. Well, having social highlight your popularity and to sort of get you out there being an influencer. And I can talk about this sort of from in the realm of politics, which is when politicians and political parties try and up their support base by trying to get extra followers. And this can be done either, like you said, by buying followers, which itself is a sort of a very ethical gray area. Well, I don't even think it's a gray area. I think it's definitely an ethical issue. But you also have bots. that are used increasingly by politicians and their social media accounts to make them appear more popular than they actually are. And how that is problematic, say in a political context, is especially when elections are around the corner and a politician is suddenly very popular online. It gives other voters the impression that this indeed is true. So, what that does is it converts social media popularity into a greater political purchasing power. And that's something that we have to be wary of, because the jury is still out on how much social media affects political outcomes. We know it affects political outcomes a great deal. There's a lot of research going on to show just the way that sort of these exacerbated number or excessive, number of followers, what they do for a politician's social media popularity. And it can be quite dangerous, because when you have politicians that are that popular online, and I'm thinking of, say, Donald Trump or Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, then you also have very rabid followers. And by that I mean you have followers that kind of stomp out any other opposing voice. And so you have, even in democratic societies, you have, and this happens in Singapore as well, where you have civil society actors that are also sort of intimidated or harassed online by anonymous people, by trolls, by followers of whichever political party. So in India, we know that it's the ruling BJP that has the numbers, and it sort of plays a big role in suppressing voice, in suppressing opposition narrative, or suppressing alternatives ideas or people that may come up. So this is dangerous territory that we're sort of toying with here.
Yeah, I think that the more and more we see these bots online, and it's very hard to distinguish which are real people, which are not. Obviously, I heard AIs can start detecting these bots, but it's not like we have it in our own social media accounts or in our software in our computer. So more and more, I feel like even if you're trying to grow an online presence, whether you're a politician or a regular YouTuber, it's going to be very tough to understand who your audience is and how you can communicate them when so much of it is bots. Now, talking about bots and AI, we are experiencing a lot of fake news these days, and it's very difficult to figure out what is fake, what's not. Even certain social medias are actually saying we're not even going to fact check any of these things, and we're just going to let it write itself out. And so we're bombarded with so many different news. We can't even tell which sources are real and what's not. I mean, what is a good way for us to, as a practice, to understand or detect how these fake news are coming out, and how to understand if they're real or not?
So there's many different things that we can do as individuals to deal with this sort of flood of fake news and misinformation that we seem to be faced with every single day. And in cases like the coronavirus, there's just so many different types of fake news that we have to deal with. So what do, right? The first thing is to be mindful of the kind of sources that we go to for getting news in the first place. Social media platforms have partnered with the World Health Organization, for example, in the case of the coronavirus crisis, to get people to view the WHO's website first rather than any alternative source of information. I think that's something, it's a good step, and it's something that we should be doing ourselves, trying to discern who is a credible authority. So a government organization, international agency, who has the credentials, right, for us to be going onto that website. So that's the first thing. The second is to then cross-verify that. So it requires a little more work on our part, but what that does is then you are checking multiple sources, you're checking social media, you're checking mainstream media, you're looking at alternative news, you're looking at websites. Ideally, if you have the time, you should be looking at websites that offer alternative points of view so that you can actually see what different experts in their fields are saying. But a lot of people don't have that time, or frankly don't want to do so. So the best thing is to then go to fact-checking websites. And there are many of them now. You have some of them that have been in business for years and years already. So you have Snopes.com, which is one of the older and well-known ones, but you also have newer ones that are emerging. So in India, you have a fact-checking company called Boom Live. And in India, you've actually had fact checkers work with social media companies, with mainstream media, with journalists for the last few years, because they were seeing so much of fake news, especially around the time of elections, that they felt that they had to do something. So fact-checking websites are a great place for people to go if they want to see whether a particular type of news is true or fake. And that's sort of something that you don't have to expend too much time and energy to do, because these people are spending time and energy to do that for you, right? So, and after that, you can also still ask an expert. There are tons of experts out there, and they have legitimate social media websites. So if in doubt, ask someone who really knows something. Don't ask your WhatsApp group. Don't ask your uncle or your neighbor, right? Like, figure out who are the sources that you want to get your information from. And I think finally, it's just incorporating a little more critical thinking in our lives. So the example that I was giving about, if you already have pre-existing biases or prejudices, that will determine the way you look at a piece of news. So once you know that, you're a little more likely to sort of think and say, okay, is this really real news, or is it something that I want to believe is real? So I think critical thinking comes in the way where you're questioning, right? Who stands to gain by this information and who stands to lose. So I think once you put a little bit of effort into doing that, it might make it easier to discern what is real and what is fake, in addition to what social media companies are already doing.
Maybe we're living in a very transitional period where well, especially for me, I didn't grow up with the internet. It only came to me during high school, university times, and I was only really active on internet after when I started working. But for our children's generations, they grow up with it. I mean, they've been touching their iPads since they were 1 or 2 years old, and even know how to maneuver around it. Maybe they have a very different view on how to deal with social media and its downsides of it. But I think that because of social media, because of internet, it created a whole new, different type of social problem. And it's a very new social problem because it didn't really exist back in when we were little kids. It created a lot of envy. It's the byproduct of like showing who you really are versus like who you actually are. And that created a lot
Yeah.
of, and I think that creates a lot of misconception of what life is to begin with. It's not about always the happy moments. I'm rich. I'm going on these vacations. Of course, you have these negative times of your life. Maybe you lost your job, you lost your spouse, you lost your children, whatever it is. You're not going to put that on social media. So everybody ends up seeing the good parts of life, and then they miss out on what's the balancing factor of life. Is that the negative parts? So that creates maybe bullying. That can be included, as well as also depression as well. So what is this? How can we tackle this psychological problem that we actually created because of this social media?
I think that's a really important point that you made, which is sort of to look at the byproducts of social media on the way we present ourselves. So we've reached a stage where social media, we use it to make ourselves feel better. And it sort of led to a lot of narcissism. It's led to a lot of triviality that's sort of posted online every day, relentlessly, unceasingly. What happens then is that people sort of really begin to think that this is their real life. And I think, again, that is something that is dangerous, and that's something that affects a lot of people, and not just young people. There are a lot of adults who place a lot of currency on how they are presented on social media, whether it's professional or personal. So I think there is a slight movement now towards presenting yourself as being more authentic. So I'd say the last few years I've been noticing that more and more people are okay to show the sadder elements or the more realistic elements of their life, or to know that their whatever body shape or size they have is fine, is good, is healthy. And I think we are having those conversations, and social media also is a space where those conversations are being held. So if you think about more acceptance for, say, curvier people, say, for instance, you have spaces where you can now not be ashamed to sort of say who you are. So in that sense, there is a slight realization that we don't have to have this plasticky artificial uses of social media, and we have to use it in healthier, more cathartic ways, which is be empathetic, be original, be real, kind of show your true self. But sadly, that also leads to bullying. It's something that is symptomatic of issues in society that we quite haven't figured out how to resolve these issues that we have in healthier ways. And so we resort to abuse or trolling or online harassment, because new media does provide these avenues for bad people to do bad things or good people to do bad things because they don't know better. So these are some of the things that are tricky. It's, in some cases, yes, they are black and white, but unfortunately, there's a lot of gray in between, because people may be shaming others or hurting others and not really realize that they're doing that.
Yeah, I think what we think we need to build out is some mental strength as well, because the more presence we have online, the more followers we have online, that also creates a negative effect as well. And we need to be able to stomach that. We need to have the heart to say, I'm doing this for my personal gain, or it could be from adding value to other people, and you're trying to make something valuable for this world. And you have to really own that. You have to mentally own it and say, whatever the bad outcome comes, I have to muscle it through. And I think that's something that we can really incorporate into our education as well.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, resilience is something that we're all talking about these days, but I don't want to trivialize the negative impacts of online abuse on someone. So as much as we can be resilient, sometimes just having this toxicity follow you throughout your day after day, it gets too much. And while I think maybe adults may be able to handle it better, although we've already seen too many examples of that not being the case. So in addition to resilience, which is probably okay if you tell your child or whoever's online that if you want to achieve a certain level of popularity, then this is one of the consequences. But it's not even popularity. Kids are just online because their lives are online, and you can't tell them to get off because their friends are online. So it's not that easy just to say stop participating in online society, because that's where life is, especially in times like this. So it's sort of not just a simple solution, or there are a whole bunch of solutions that we need to put in place simultaneously to sort of tackle this.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much for your time. It was a lot of valuable insights there.
Thank you. It was really fun being on the show.
Hi, this is your host Takatoshi Shibayama. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Now, if you enjoyed or disliked the show, please let me know by writing in the comment section. The only way I can improve or add value to you is through your voices. If there are any topics that you would like me to pick up, please also let me know in the comments. I'd love to start chatting with you all. And if you would like to continue watching the show, please subscribe. Thank you.